Hey, it's Rebecca back with part five, our final part in this five-part series answering the question, what is workplace culture and how do we transform it for the better? If you're a formal leader in your organization, you really need to pay attention to this one. And even if you're not a formal leader, hang in there with me because I think this will give you some language to describe your experience with past leaders and also help you along your journey if you're looking to become a formal leader one day. So we ended video 4 with a conversation about how transforming culture is really about energy, connection, and courage. It's about updating our inner operating systems and relating with each other differently. If you missed that video, by the way, you might want to go back and watch that one. But let me ask you a question. Who in an organization is responsible for doing the work of energy, connection, and courage? The answer, of course, is everyone. Culture is everybody's business. Which is why our work is most impactful when we can touch as many lives on a team or in an organization as possible. But if you are a formal leader in an organization, you have an extra set of privileges and responsibilities when it comes to culture. And the way that we talk with leaders about those privileges and responsibilities is through the lens of another set of 3 words: demonstrate, reward, and discourage. Let's start with demonstrate. So the truth is that as a leader of a team, people are watching you all the time. Hopefully your actions and your words are aligned, but if they're not, what you do is really more important than what you say. Every single moment of every single day, you are modeling behavior for people on your team and within your organization. So it's really important to be aware of what you're modeling. Let me give you an example. If you want people on your team to say, be more transparent about their mistakes, to admit them so that the team can learn from them, then the very first thing you need to do is be a person who admits your own mistakes publicly when it's helpful. Normalize mistakes as part of the process of learning and working together. Demonstrate what it looks like to own them and to learn from them. When it comes to culture, no matter what you want to change on your team, your first order of business is to make sure that you are demonstrating the characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors that you want to see among other people on your team. The second word is reward. So what happens for us is when we verbally or physically reward another human being for something, it triggers specific neural pathways in their brain that connect that rewarded activity with a pleasant feeling. So we want to do more of those. So if I say to my teammate, that was such a good idea, thank you so much for sharing, my teammate is more likely to share ideas with me in the future because I've rewarded her vulnerability and courage. Here's another example. Let's say there are a couple people on your team who don't tend to get along well. They have a lot of unresolved conflict with each other. As a leader invested in improving the culture, what you want for those 2 people and for all people is to be able to navigate their differences productively in a way that prioritizes connection and courage over rightness or ego or winning. And let's say you observe these 2 people in a meeting have a difficult conversation with each other where they really manage it well. They're truthful but caring with each other, and they end up reaching a win-win. This exchange should be rewarded, especially if it's a first for the 2 people. Now, depending on the situation, you might reward them for it privately, or you might even reward it publicly so that other people on the team learn that what is valued here is navigating differences productively. Let's just say, as the leader of the team, you might say, Jamal and Paula, I know that that conversation was a difficult one because you had really different opinions on where it needed to go. I just appreciate how you navigated that. Great work. That's an example of a subtle but powerful reward. So when it comes to culture, your second order of business as a leader is to be sure that you are directly and indirectly and subtly and overtly rewarding the characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors you want to see on your team. That brings us to the third word, and the one that is often most difficult for leaders, and that word is discourage. So the hard truth here is that if there are attitudes and behaviors that undermine the culture of your team and that undermine performance, that are being demonstrated by people on your team, those must be respectfully but directly called out. They must be addressed proactively, and people need to be held accountable for their actions. That's the hard truth. So for example, let's say there are, maybe there's a person on your team, we'll call him Joe. and Joe tends to share information that isn't his to share. You observe him gossiping and kind of creating drama on the team. The way you might discourage that, there's a couple of options. If you haven't explicitly made it clear to your team that gossiping isn't acceptable, then you might want to do that at a team meeting. Just kind of set the guidelines, manage expectations for the team. But you might also discourage it in another way. You might pull Joe aside privately and say to him something like, Joe, I want to discuss this behavior that I've observed that I think is really unhelpful for our team. I often notice you talking with colleagues in a way that seems like gossip. And on a couple of occasions, I've overheard you share information that isn't yours to share. And then you could continue the conversation from there, listening to Jay's perspective and clarifying expectations and challenging him to do better moving forward. Now, from our experience, most leaders find discouraging the hardest one. We oftentimes tolerate behavior on our team that really isn't acceptable or productive for lots of reasons. We don't like conflict or anything that feels like conflict. We're worried about being perceived a certain way. Maybe the person is a high performer and we've decided that the results they produce for the team is worth the drama. Or maybe we're just busy and we don't feel like we have the time or energy to dedicate to one of these hard conversations. So this is all understandable, but as Timothy Clark says, what we tolerate, we normalize. So tolerating unhelpful attitudes and behaviors on the team decreases the morale and the engagement and ultimately undermines culture. So let's do a recap. Because of the positional power that your title and role inherently bring as a leader, your actions speak louder than your words. People are watching you all the time and gathering insights from what you're demonstrating and rewarding and discouraging about what is expected and accepted and valued. Make sure you are demonstrating, rewarding, and discouraging as you need to the right things. And lastly, managing energy, prioritizing connection, and choosing courage is everybody's work, but you must go first. That brings us to the end of this 5-part series. Thanks for joining me.